So 9th to 13th century is a golden time for temple architecture in India, also temple architecture in Southeast Asia, and especially in Cambodia. Angkor Wat is the largest religious precinct in the world as nominated by UNESCO. But eventually the belief also got shifted from Vishnu or Shiva to Buddha. I will not call it Hinduism to Buddhism. This is a shift, a very subtle shift where nothing changed architecturally. It is just people started worshipping Buddha instead of Vishnu and Shiva. Every temple has a sthala vruksham. So these sthala vrukshams are like the trees which are locally grown, which impact the microclimate of a temple. So that's why when we enter a temple, there is a different experience.
Namaste. Welcome to Sangam Talks. In today's discussion, we would be discussing about India's architecture and how in our history, architecture has played a great role in civilizational prospects, not only within the Bharatiya perspective, but also how it transcended to the Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, and how our temple architecture played a greater role in the political administration, in economic pursuits, and all. Today we have with us Dr. Ujwala Khot Palsuleji, who is a globally recognized conservation architect, cultural historian, and founder of Samrachana. She travels across Asia and conducts travel tours specifically focused on temple architecture, its conservation, and also its research. So, welcome to Sangam Talks, ma'am.
Namaste. Dhanyavad.
Ma'am, I would like to know about your pursuits. Like, what motivated you to shift or motivated you to take temple conservation or temple architecture as a means of subject?
Okay. So to start with, this whole journey of pursuing temple architecture as a major subject started very early in my life. It is both because of the inquisitiveness, because of the curiosity, as well as this interest in how temple architecture is constructed all across India. And the reason was my father was into government's job, and he used to avail this scheme called LTC. And we used to travel every couple of years to different locations to visit different cities, heritage cities. What was interesting in this whole journey was not just visiting these places, but he used to make sure that we meet local historians, local archaeologists, local scholars, and local people, artists, and all, so that we understand these sites in a better way. And my mother, being a artist herself, she has a very keen aptitude towards details, sculptures, local art and craft. So all these discussions on site eventually developed my interest towards heritage sites. So when eventually the time came to select career, architecture was the very natural way of progression. Also because that was the step to get into architectural conservation, which was my very obvious choice of career. So I did my graduation masters from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. I also got opportunity to get MPhil degree from Lund University, Sweden, and that was the time when I visited Cambodia for the first time. Uh, Eventually, when I started working on in conservation, I realized that temple architecture is something which is misinterpreted or not really explored in India the way it should be. And when I visited Cambodia, that is the time when that was the time when I really understood that this is the place where I really want to explore temple architecture into. And then eventually it became my passion to work in temple architecture of Cambodia. Its influences from India or across various regions of India, and that's how this whole journey has been. And since last 25 years, I have been working on temple architecture, influences of temple architecture of India on Southeast Asia, with a bigger focus on temples from Dravida region, the southern part of India, to Cambodia. So that is how this has happened.
Ma'am, so when we talk about temples in Bharat, and also in Southeast Asia countries, we see that temple is also a administrative center,
Mhm.
also a center of economic pursuits, a center of knowledge, center of learning. So it's all, it's the hub or it's the center of the entire civilization of that particular location. So, but when we see in a perspective, like when the Indian style of architecture is seen also in the places like Cambodia, Java, Sumatra, etc., what message does it carry? When we also find temples similar to India are being found in Cambodia, what message does it carry and how do we need to see it?
So, like you said, this is what I meant when I said temple architecture is not really delved into the way it should be, because temples are not really only spaces of worship. That is the narrative which is given to us by the colonial authors. Temples used to be these administrative centers, these social cultural centers, uh, a very important center for law and order. These were the codes. So the temple itself was all inclusive. That was the nucleus of a settlement, and that's why we see many temples all across all the settlements in India, because those were the places where schools used to run. Gurukulams are there. There are people who are learning Vedas, Vedangas, and other shastras. There are schools which are teaching dharma shastra. So that is one aspect of temple. The other aspect of temple is cultural continuity. So like dance forms, like Tanjavur is very famous for Bharatanatyam, and that is the origin of Bharatanatyam also. So, and Tanjavur temple has 108 karnas carved on the temple itself. So likewise, it is all inclusive. Temple used to be a very important center where kings used to sit and conduct his courts. And we don't see in Indian context palaces of kings. We only see temples, royal temples like Brihadeshwara temple. So that is the context for Indian temples in India. And when we look at temples in Southeast Asia, these temples are also their political, socio-cultural, administrative centers. And now this is, the compartmentalization that we are looking at, social, cultural, or administrative. So the time that we are looking at, say around 2000 years ago, when these temples were flourishing in Southeast Asia or even in India, it is a fluid thing. Everything is interrelated, everything is overlapping with each other. So these Cambodian temples are also constructed as important political centers. These are important cultural centers and educational centers. uh, just to name, like in Angkor Wat temple, we get many Sanskrit inscriptions which talk about the number of books which are preserved in the library of Angkor Wat, or how many students are learning there. What is the the background of teachers who are teaching in that institution. So there are many such temples in Cambodia also which record all these things. They also maintain records of their treasury, they maintain records of their agricultural produces, how they are dealing with taxes. So all of that is recorded in temple inscriptions, and that is the continuity that we are looking at. So you know um, not just the architecture of it, but how these spaces were utilized and how this overlapping happened, how this continuity was carried from generations after generations for almost 1500 years. So starting from 1st century till 15th century, we see this continuity in both these regions, India as well as Cambodia. And that is one of the influences that we see. I mean, that is not the direct influence, but the cultural continuity, the civilizational continuity that we see all across the cultural region of India and Cambodia.
So I would like to take a moment to go back to into the political history, wherein along with administrative politics, along with the pursuits for kingdoms, the temple architecture also traveled to Southeast Asia. So could you give a glimpse about how the Cholas, the Pandyas were in pursuit of traveling to Southeast Asia and how temple architecture became a symbol of their pursuits?
Okay, to answer this, I would start with Indian temple architecture, because when we look at Indian temples, the start point of Indian temples, the structural temples that we see, starting from 1st century BC, we get structural evidences of temples. And eventually, by 5th, 6th century, we get sites like Pattadakkal, Aihole, Badami, or even in North India, we have Udaygiri, which is in Madhya Pradesh. All these sites were experimenting with temple architecture. So, how a temple should be, what is the language, architectural language of a temple. So, the overall aim of constructing temple is it is a replica of a macrocosm or the universe into a microcosm, and there are many permutation combinations which these sthapatis have experimented with, and that these sites show us all these experiments. And eventually by the end of 8th century we see a good model of a temple, fully constructed, fully developed temple in India. But after 8th century we get a larger temples in history of temple architecture, like Brihadeshwara temple, Gangaikonda Cholapuram. These temples are more public temples. These are like, royal temples, because these are not only because these are constructed by royal family, but these were constructed to accommodate more and more people in the premises of a temple. And
It's a
eventually,
temple city in its own way.
yes, and all these temples, so that the this also shows us how social conditions have changed. So from a singular, or from a very private worship that used to happen earlier, now this is more of a larger festivals or more celebrations in the temple, more cultural identity related to temple, like dance and like I said, agricultural activities. Everything is happening within the premises of temples. And similarly, after 8th century, we see larger temples like Brihadeshwara in southern part of India. We see Lingaraja temple, Sun temple, Konark in Kalinga region. We see Somanatha temple or other temples like Sun temple Modhera in western India. Northern India, we see Khajuraho group of temples. So all these temples are like epitome of temple architecture in India. Now when we look at Indian temple architecture in Cambodia, they also have their own journey of evolution. So they started since first century AD. We see footprints of Indic culture or Hindu culture in Cambodia. So we see, Sanskrit inscriptions, Sanskrit as a language of their royal courts, their political, all the endeavors. We see Shaka era being used as their normal calendar system. Varmana title being used by the kings as a honorific title for their kings, which is also very similar to Indian context. And we see very smaller footprints of singular temples, like only Garbhagriha or temple constructed as part of larger ashramas. So these references are there from 1st century till 5th century. Now 5th century onwards, there is a revival in their political system. So there is a kingdom called Shenla, which unified the larger Kambuja Desha. And we see slightly, temples with more evolved architecturally. These evolved temples have Garbhagriha Mandapa, Mukha Mandapa, enclosure wall. So slightly better off architecturally than earlier temples, which are just Garbhagriha temples. But after 8th century, they also have a political shift. And now there is a king called Jayavarmana II. He shifts from Java to Cambodia. He declares himself as a Chakravarti Samrat of Kambuja Desha. Now during this time, the Cambodian region, the Kambuja Desha, is current day Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, uh, Singapore, Malaysia, and some part of Indonesia. So this is the huge cultural, huge region which was under Kambuja Desha. And Jayavarmana also brought with him a different way of looking at temple architecture. So he wanted to construct temple as a nucleus of city, and every king afterwards started constructing this nucleus for the city, which is a temple. Now this temple would have it becomes the center of that city, enclosed with multiple layers of settlement. And all of this is abiding by the rules of temple construction or city planning principles, which are given in our shastras, which are followed in India, and they have modified it suiting the culture, the landscape of that place. So we see some amalgamation of local landscape with shastras overlapped on it, a different city form which is exact square in shape. At the center of it is temple, which will be constructed on a higher platform, or they will construct a platform to have it on a higher locus. And that's how these temple cities are constructed after 802 AD. So he actually wanted to sanctify the whole land of Kambuja Desha using temple as a medium to do it. And eventually we see temples dedicated to Shiva, Vishnu, Harihara, and temples constructed as astronomical centers, temple constructed as observatories, as a place where which is exclusively institution in itself to teach Vedas. So likewise, there are kings who are constructing these temples year after year up to 14th century. And that's how we see this journey going simultaneously. Now coming back to the political history, kings have always been in association with Kambuja Desha, the kings who are ruling in India. So they have this to and fro trade with Kambuja Desha, being Kambuja being in the center for trade route from India to China. So the very popular Silk Route that is known to everybody, the route started from China, it went to the Western world up to Rome. But there are many smaller routes also to this larger Silk Route. So these smaller routes they are either sea routes, so China, Southeast Asia, India, and then through inland port it will go to the western coast of India, and then it will go to Rome. So in this context, the way India got benefited because of the trade between China and Rome. Similarly, Cambodia also became a major hub of trade because of the trade between India and China. And now all the kings that we are looking at from first century till about 10th century, they have this conversation going on with Cambodian kings and with China, because that is the best place for them to keep their ships, to halt there. They have beautiful ports there. They have all conducive environment to keep their port or a halting station at Cambodia. What happened in 1025 AD, which changed this whole scenario about trade and ports in Southeast Asia, is till 9th century, everybody is working independently. So Kambuja Desha is independent. There is a Shama dynasty. There is a Champa dynasty. There are Sri Vijaya dynasty, Tamralipti. All of these are part of Southeast Asian dynasties. Here in India, we have Chola dynasty. So Chola's Raja Chola, who constructed Brihadeshwara temple, has very keen eye on how this trade is happening between India to China, and how all these trade routes, sea routes, are managed by Srivijaya dynasty, which is currently Indonesia. So Indonesia has all of these smaller islands, and there are these bottlenecks. So all these bottlenecks were handled by Srivijaya dynasty. These were monitored, taxed by Srivijaya dynasty. Now Rajaraja Chola's after the next the son of Rajaraja Chola, Rajendra Chola, he was extremely ambitious and he knew how to streamline these things. So he was ambitious also because he wanted to uh, annex lot of these kings like Kalinga, or even he went up to Pala dynasty. He brought Ganga from there to the southern part of India. He constructed Gangaikonda Cholapuram to celebrate his victory. Along with that, he also had a close eye on what is happening in Southeast Asia as part of their political policies. Ha. Kadaram. So, what happened during this time is 1025 AD. Kambuja Desha has a king called Suryavarmana I. He is extremely powerful, very much like Rajendra Chola, ambitious, and he consolidated his kingdom. He consolidated Vietnam, all of these surrounding countries which we see today, part of Kambuja Desha. Now, slowly, gradually, he started attacking Sri Vijaya's ports. And Sri Vijaya retaliated, obviously, because that is their. Sri Vijaya is known for it is a sea faring kingdom. They are ruling from sea because they are owning up all these ports in Southeast Asia. So, as Khmer king Suryavarmana I started attacking ports of Sri Vijaya along with Tamralipti dynasty, they retaliated this attack. Now, during this time, to support Khmer's, Rajendra Chola started his naval expedition towards Southeast Asia, and he conquered these. He defeated Srivijaya dynasty, and this benefited Khmer's in a way. So Khmer's and Cholas, though they were not direct in alliance, but because of the expedition which happened from southern part of India, Coromandala coast to the Srivijaya dynasty, these Srivijaya and Tamralipti got defeated. Eventually, Khmer's and Cholas, they got control of all these ports and all these bottlenecks, which were very prominent, important, significant for the trade between India to China. And they made a lot of these policies eventually. They made Nagapattinam a free port. They made, these import-export policies very clear between India and Southeast Asia, which is Khmer's now, and China. And all of this, because of this political change, 1025 onwards, for next 50 years, all the ports were under control of Cholas and Khmer's, directly or indirectly. And that is the time when we see larger temples getting constructed in both the regions. And this prosperity, which is gained because of the trade, control on these, the ports which are there, import-export became very frequent between China and Southeast Asia to India, again to Rome. We see southern part of India getting flourished extremely prosperous because of the trade. Lot of people are settling in southern part of India. So Nagapattinam is like a metropolitan. There are many people who are coming from China and Southeast Asia and getting settled in Nagapattinam or Mamallapuram. So we have records which tell us that people knew multiple languages so that they could interact with different, multicultural people. There were fortifications. They had added few places, surrounding places to Nagapattinam so that it becomes a larger administrative center to cater to the infrastructural requirement of trade, which is happening at Nagapattinam. So these are also, architectural advancements that we see during this time. So 9th to 13th century is a golden time for temple architecture in India, also temple architecture in Southeast Asia, and especially in Cambodia, because after Suryavarmana I's reign, around 50 years after that, we see the largest temple getting constructed in Cambodia, which is Angkor Wat temple. Exactly after 53 years of Suryavarmana I's death, and that is how these political will, their understanding of the geopolitics of that period, understanding of commercial policies that they could devise to enhance prosperity. This all came together to give prosperity to both these regions, and they worked in alliance for a long time.
That was wonderful insight, because not many know that Cambodia was at one point of time uh, a catalyst between China and India when it comes to trade. Right. So in the meanwhile, something went wrong when the British turned up, and they had their own distortions to introduce. They had their own misappropriation of knowledge, myths to spread, and so what do you think is the most damaging what do you think is the most damaging myth which was spread by the British when it comes to temple architecture, when it comes to spiritual pursuits, when it comes to the holistic approach that we had towards temples?
When British rule started in India, the colonial rule started in India, the first and foremost, much discussed topic about distortion is about education system, which is distorted during their time. Apart from the main education system which was there in India, which was again temples were at the center of this education system. So we had Gurukulams. We were, everybody was offered with education irrespective of their status in the society. That link got disturbed because of the British rule. And very importantly, the way we used to look at temples, or the culturally, there is a system of understanding of temples in India. So every Hindu knew what temples were like. What is the role of temple in the society? In society, as in their personal lives, their their work wise. Everybody has to visit temple for one or the other reason. But eventually, after this colonial invasion, the biggest problem which arose was this disconnection of society from temples, because all the literature that we get from colonial period, they talk about temples in isolation. They talk about temple as sacred spaces of worship. Whereas this whole concept of worshipping in Hindu religion is very different from what we find in other religions. So when they started comparing temples with, say, mosques or churches, the whole objective or the whole perspective of looking at temples have changed. And in last 200 years, starting from 1810, this the whatever is published by the Western authors, starting from Ferguson, they have not understood the essence of temple itself, because temples, the way they looked at it is more of an aggression of spaces, or a lot of spaces added irrelevantly within the temple premises, a lot of sculptures which they didn't understand why these are there and what is the relevance of these sculptures, what are the stories carved on the temples, what is the significance of the different parts of temples. So they started explaining these temples only physically. So the documentation which Ferguson has done in his book, which is published in first in 1850s, 1860s, republished in 1910, this book talks about a very drastic Aryan Dravidian divide. It talks about very stringent Nagara and Dravida divide. Temple architecture, he actually divides it into two parts. He divides it into Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. Another thing is, after Ferguson also, whatever people have explained, all the scholars who explained temple architecture, they only talk about the physicality of temple. Certain type of temple columns, certain type of temple motifs or dynasties. So this is all again in compartments that we see, and all the understanding developed is only about one compartment of dynasties, one compartment of elements, one compartment of certain spaces within temples, because there is no relation with people, there is no relationship with rituals, there is no relationship with the continuity of culture, which is because of the temples. And because of this segregation, even the later scholars or later architects started looking at temples as one, either it is very complex, so don't touch him because these are extremely complex entities, and secondly they are monuments or they are center of pilgrimage, so or tourism. So these are different perspectives which emerged because of this lack of understanding of temples holistically, and that holistic understanding was disturbed because of the colonial invasion in between, and this link completely broke um, in say early 18th century, 19th century, and it is still going on because even today people don't realize what is the importance of a temple in society. It is again seen in isolation, it is seen as a site to be visited once in a while, or irrespective of, or eliminating all other cultural aspects related to temple. And that is the biggest disadvantage of last 200 years of colonial rule, as well as later on which people followed as a continuity of that literature which was published earlier.
So, without understanding the essence of the temple, without understanding the spiritual or the scientific aspects of the temple, the British or the Western perspective saw the temples as mere stone, right? But at some point of time, they had an understanding that this is beyond that,
Mhm.
but still they tried to hide something about it. So, what do you think was the strategic thing which they thought this needs to be hidden or this needs to be distorted, destroyed, so that their colonial rule can be implemented in a better way? What do you think?
See, I think the biggest strategy was they wanted to destroy it because they knew the soul of Indian culture lies in temples. And without having that understanding, they would not arrive at this strategy of destroying this culture, through eliminating temples from the society. Um, the afterwards what we see, this during colonial time what happened is, because they understood that this is how this culture is working, or the continuity is through temples, eliminating temples or separating temples from the society, separating culture, or even uh, naming them as only sacred, or only uh, dividing them based on styles, dividing them based on dynasties, dividing them even based on how people are entering into a temple. Different divides that were created during this time affected a lot of how Indians look at temples. So this westernized perspective of looking at temples is what is been followed for a long time. And this westernized perspective is dividing or compartmentalizing a lot of things which were not there earlier. So they created this divide with even the intellectual properties, even the cultural continuities that we had, even the north and south dance forms, cultural forms, the literature which is available, which was earlier there, Shastra. So they tried to
The
divide a lot of,
iconography.
yeah. So they had this understanding of temples. They knew it is much beyond what is the physicality of a temple, but deliberately they secluded it, or they created a whole generations after generations of people who now don't know what temples are all about. We are completely disassociated from the original concept of temple, why temples were constructed, how they were important centers of society at one point in time, and now they are completely into isolation. They are just monuments, or they are just some entity, physical entity for the settlements today.
You gave as a political history as to how, along with political pursuits, architecture also traveled to Cambodia and how it took shape there, and how Hindu thought or Sanatan Dharma spread there also. and how several of the iconography are also seen there, and how gradually there was also diminishing of such architectures in Cambodia, because we come to know in the later stage that there are many temple complexes which was later discovered. So what caused the decay over there, or was it left to abandon? Because even Angkor Wat was not completely excavated for a long time. But also recently also there was one excavation which which gave a glimpse to the world as to how a similar architecture of the size of Angkor Wat also discovers. So please tell us something about this.
So in Cambodia, starting from first century till 1113 AD, so they have their own growth of temple architecture. There are larger temples getting constructed. There are temple cities getting constructed from 8th century till 14th century. So as you mentioned, Angkor Wat is the largest religious precinct in the world as nominated by UNESCO. And when it was constructed, the king also envisaged it as the largest temple in the world at that point in time, Suryavarmana II. He wanted to construct a temple which nobody has ever seen and nobody has ever witnessed, the enormity of a temple. And that's why he conceptualized this temple on a concept of Paravishnu Loka, and that is which is embedded in the architecture of temple. So what we see, this influence of Indian temple architecture on Cambodia, it's not a linear influence. There are, it is like a civilizational continuity. It is a civilizational sibling of India. So it is not that Hindu religion is adopted, it is inherited, like other regions of India. Similarly, they have also inherited the religion, and they continued, they modified certain practices, they modified architecture based on their local conditions and all. What happened is, after Suryavarmana II's period, which is a glorious period of Cambodian history, Kambuja history, after this period there are a lot of invasions by Siam and Vietnam, which is Champa dynasty. Because at one point in time, whatever Suryavarmana I and Suryavarmana II, starting from 1006 AD till 1150 AD, these 150 years, they have their ups and downs, but more or less, whole of Southeast Asia was under Khmer rule. Khmer is the local Khmer kings, Kambuja kings. But all these smaller kingdoms like Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, they had their own kingdoms there. So they were in alliance with Kambuja Desha. So eventually there was this rivalry, there was this internal conflict started happening after 1150, after the death of Suryavarmana II. So the legacy of Suryavarmana continued for another 50 years. But after that there was a period of decline. Slowly, gradually, this kingdom started attacking Kambuja Desha. And the last big attack was in 1432 by Siamese, and they destroyed much of the architecture of Cambodia. So destroyed as in they took away the wealth, treasure from the temples. They enslaved people from Kambuja Desha. And if you look at the location of Siem Reap, which is Angkor region where where Angkor Wat is situated, it has easiest proximity to Thailand. So Siam, which is current day Thailand, they had easy access to Angkor region. But when we look at the larger Kambuja Desha, so Siem Reap or Angkor becomes the center point of their city, their capital or their kingdom. But eventually, all these smaller kingdoms started attacking. 1432 is the last straw where everything got destroyed. They shifted their capital from Angkor region to Phnom Penh, which is their current day capital. And though it is popularly believed that these sites were abandoned, these were never abandoned, but the capital city got shifted, and that's why the focus was more on Phnom Penh rather than Angkor region. And people were residing in the temple premises the way we have it in India. So there is a settlement. There are people who are residing within prakarams of the temple. But eventually, the belief also got shifted from Vishnu or Shiva to Buddha. I will not call it Hinduism to Buddhism. This is a shift, a very subtle shift where nothing changed architecturally. It is just people started worshipping Buddha instead of Vishnu and Shiva.
It was a specialization of a particular lineage.
And eventually, the Vigraha of Vishnu, which was there in Angkor Wat, now people started worshipping it as Buddha. So that is the change of culture, if we can call it that. But eventually, people celebrated various festivals within temple premises. So till 19th century, till French colony got established in Cambodia, there was this, all these places were known to local people. But French, when they got introduced to Cambodia, they started new way of looking at this site. So they got these sites more popularized in Western world. They published material on this. They also defined the chronology of different kings of Kambuja Desha, and they contributed towards restoration of this place. And they diverted funds also. They captured some part of Thailand so that this whole Khmer typology of temples could be under their control. They established few institutions in that region, but eventually, even after doing that, the whole approach was to deforestation of the temples, because in this 500 years, considering the climate of this region, there are a lot of trees which grew over these temples, and they have actually encapsulated, engulfed into this temple. So temple and forest became one, because there was no fund, for earlier people there. It was only to be there on site, and they have no restoration, nothing. I mean, they never maintained these sites as temples before. So in around 1910, they started, French rule was there, and they started with deforestation of this area. They cleared many temples there. But in after Cambodia got its freedom, again there was a decline phase. So they knew about these temples, but they were into this revival phase. They are still, overcoming this colonial power, re-establishing their pride, and so a lot of ups and downs in their political history. And then there was Khmer Rouge. So there was that is the darkest period of Cambodian history. After 1050 AD, when there is a darkest period, this is the darkest period of their history. Now, after that, India helped them in 1988 to re-establish so-called dignity of Angkor region. So the nomination dossier was filed for UNESCO's nomination for Angkor Wat, and India helped Cambodian government to support as a knowledge partner for that assignment. And eventually, in 1992, Angkor Wat got nominated as World Heritage Site. Uh, but after that, there are around 40 countries which are working in Cambodia for the restoration and maintenance of these sites. So there are more than 120 temples which are still which are discovered so far, and there are many more to come, because a lot of it is within forest till now. Only 400 square kilometers area could be cleared by this time, but there are more to it. I mean, it is all spread across till Laos, Vietnam, and wherever Khmer temples were constructed, wherever this dynasty ruled. So there are temple traces, there are temple cities which are there in beneath these forest areas, and these are non-approachable because of various reasons. Because of the the Vietnam America war, so they had these landmines, they have unapproachable areas, dense forests, climatic conditions. So there are reasons of not exploring many of it, but whatever is explored is also enough for us to understand how this whole continuity must have been at that point.
In your book, Cambodia, India Outside India, you mentioned some really interesting information about how Dravidian architecture resembled with the Khmer temples of Cambodia. Could you please explain that?
Yes, so this book, Cambodia, India Outside India, is actually an outcome of my PhD, the doctoral studies that I have undertook for almost 5 years. And before that, another 10 years of studies in Cambodia. So this book talks about the architectural influences of India and Cambodia at a larger scale, and at a contextual scale, how Dravidian temples influenced, or some traces of Dravidian temple architecture on the architecture of Cambodia. Uh, and during this journey of influences, we see many similarities in temple architecture of India and Cambodia. So, Dravidian temple architecture, though at various levels, like I said, physically they look very different. So, the when we visit any Khmer temple, there is a glimpse of Indian temple, Dravida temple, but on a very second moment, you feel that there is something local about these structures. When we look at architecture of it, we get into intellectual parameters of intellectual details of these temples, like how they have placed these columns, how these spaces are evolved in each temple. So there is different language to it. There is a different approach of developing spaces in temples in Cambodia, which is different from Indian temples at a larger scale. But when we get into more detailed study of these temples, it is observed that though these are physically different, or spatially they have a different way of doing it, they have more formal way of approaching temple architecture than our temples in Dravida part of India. But uh, the shastras which are used, they are extremely same. So the for example, Vaikhanasa Agama, which is used for to construct or to which gives us philosophy of Vishnu temples. Very same agamas are used there in Cambodia also. We also get references where they have written in inscriptions that people from southern part of India, Chola Nadu, they came here and they constructed this temple. So likewise, there are many references that we get which give us direct association of southern part of India and Cambodia at various levels. So when we look at this relationship of India outside India, it is not just that word, India versus India there. It is the feeling that one gets when we visit Cambodian temples, when we are there in the temple, iconography that we see, stories that we see on temples, um, even their manifestation of different stories, that is very local, that is very pertaining to their own understanding of stories of Ramayana, Mahabharata, or Samudra Manthana, which is widely seen all across Cambodia. And that's how this is extended cultural region of India. So whenever I look at Cambodia, or when I call it India outside India, it works at two levels. One is the academic word using, which is breaking this colonial mindset of looking at India in compartment like India and Cambodia. And there were few people who visited Cambodia at one point in time, and that's how this whole thing reached there. That is breaking that notion of singular or linear way of looking at Cambodian history or Cambodian architecture. The second level is very emotional, because when I visited Cambodia for the first time, and when I was there in the temple of Angkor Wat, I could feel that this is India. It is extremely like Indian temples. But like I said, at the second moment, you don't recognize it because there are very smaller details which are their details. Overall story is same, and that's why this whole the term which is India outside India came to my mind when I was there in the temple.
So when your research took place, what was that one experience or what was that one particular exposure that made you feel this is it? Cambodia is India outside India. Any specific any experience of like maybe literary source, maybe an architectural exploration, maybe a discovery of something which was unique as a part of your PhD?
So I started going there in 2005. Like I said, as part of my MPhil program, I visited Cambodia for the first time, and I could explain it to all my participants there. So we were 30 people from 30 different countries. I was representing India in that group, and I was not aware about Cambodia when I started when I visited it for the first time. Because of lack of social media and internet, it was not as easily available as it is today. But once I came back, I started reading more and more about Cambodia. So I researched a lot. I read more about Cambodia, India, this association, cultural history. But while documenting temples in Cambodia, I documented more than 70 temples, architectural documentation of temples. And I realized that every temple in Cambodia has a different aspect of Indian philosophy to offer. So there is a temple called as Nom Beking. It is a capital temple of Jayanagari, which is constructed after the first king Jayavarmana II. She constructed Hariharalaya as a capital city, and then after two generations, the next king shifted his capital to Jayanagari, and he constructs this Nom Beking. Now that temple is a square temple on hill, which is oval in shape. Now, as per their standard application of principles, the city has to be square and the temple has to be square at the center. But now the this hill on which this temple is located is oval in shape. So what they did is on hilltop there is this temple Nombeking. So gradually they have created these enclosure walls which are rectangular. So they have enclosed this hill base as a rectangular enclosure wall, and then at the end again there is a square shaped capital. Eventually that small square oval gets converted into another square with enclosed with a moat. What is interesting in this temple is on the top of the hill, which is the main temple of Bekhang, it has 108 shrines there. and they are designed so beautifully. So it's a stepped kind of a temple. On every step there are a certain number of garbhagrihas, and at the bottom of that stepped pyramid again there are certain temples. Now all of them putting together there is a 108 temples, and from every side of this square, when you stand at the center of the of one edge of temple, you can see 33 smaller temples. Now when we look at this Shiva philosophy, or the numbers relevance also 108, 33, all of this relates to certain significant numbers in Indian philosophy. So this was the place, Nom Bekeng, where I realized that, every temple, like Angkor Wat is very famous for its intense philosophical aspect of architecture. But even the small temple like Nom Bekhang, or a small temple like Preru, these are constructed with utmost detail, with using precise shastra, precise message that they want to convey through these temples, and that's what triggered my interest in delving into more and more about this temple architecture, because each temples gives you a different story, which probably at times we have to dig deep into our shastras. We have to really understand what is written here, because we can see architecturally it is there, so there must be something written in our shastras, so it is other way around now.
So your conviction as a part of your research during your PhD was the passion behind the start of Samrachana also.
Yes.
And you conduct temple architectural tours to Cambodia. So how has been the experience so far, and how has been the response so far?
Okay, so Samrachana was in my minds for a couple of years. So when I started working on Cambodia, I realized um, there is very little awareness about this larger cultural region that I always talk about. Southeast Asia being sibling of ancient India, that awareness is not there in India. People used to ask me when I used to tell them about Cambodia, they even didn't know this name. If there is any temple, is like a far-fetched thing. But Cambodia as a country was also not known to people in 2005 to 2006. So I wanted to do something to um, bring this to people's memory, back to people's memory, that there was a large cultural region called Southeast Asia, ancient Bharatavarsha, which included all of this together. And Indian or Hindu culture can be seen in all these countries. But because of my role as a administrative head of many organizations before, or heading many institutions, I could not really focus on the research of it. So finally, I started Samrachana as an organization which will completely focus on research, conservation, and the continuity of heritage in these regions. And as part of this, the first and foremost, I started conducting few online courses. Eventually, it reached a lot of people all across the world. So every month, I conduct these courses to educate people, to at least create awareness about Cambodia in India and across various countries. And second outcome of this was, when people started attending these courses, they asked me about the visits to Cambodia, and that happened eventually. So one thing led to other, and now I I take people to Cambodia, whosoever is interested into knowing the cultural region of Cambodia. So it is like a study tour, 8 day study tour, which people attend. They it's like morning to evening intense understanding of temples. Again, there is a sequence to it. So based on my understanding of whatever I have learned so far, I try to share it with people with certain layers, so that everybody gets something out of this study tour, and when they go back to their own countries, they can research more about it with respect to their own interest area. So there are historians, researchers, architects, even practitioners, or people from MNCs, people like IAS officers, retired officers, and those who are interested to know more about Cambodia. So far it has been really going well. Lot of people are interested in visiting Cambodia, and I'm happy that I could contribute to the way they are looking at temple architecture in more Indianized way than earlier.
So you have academic experience, you have published your own works. At the same time, you're also on ground. You visit temples, conducting study tours, and on having hands-on conservation. So Just a comparative question: which one is easier, conserving a 1,000-year-old temple or reviving a 5,000-year-old perspective or a mindset in today's generation? Neither or either.
These are two different things completely, because conserving a temple, or say a 1,000-year-old structure, temple architecture, it involves a lot of energy, lot of time, because it needs attention, it needs technology, expertise, uh, coordination with different agencies. But it is a material, it is a physical entity which is to be conserved, restored for future generations, or to prolong life of a structure. That is conservation. But when I look at this, reviving culture, it's an ongoing process, because it is an intangible thing, and because of the distortion which happened in last 200 years, it is difficult to bring back people from their mindset to the lens that we want them to look at these temples as. And it's a huge process. It will need another 100 years to ensure that people understand significance of temples. Again, there are many layers to it. I mean, I feel that, restoration or having cultural practices is one thing, but temple as a entity itself, there were a lot of layers which were there in temple cities. Like, there were artists, there were artifacts which were produced, there were, every region has its own weaving technique, there are weavers which are still there. All of this has gone into isolation. There are even literature which is there in the temple, a lot of manuscripts, a lot of literature which is in the temple as a library, uh, a lot of techniques which were used during that time, all of that is lost in this process. So reviving them, putting them together as a part of larger context of temple, as part of temple itself, the temple culture, reviving that is is difficult, because it depends on how the society is thinking about temples. So changing the narrative, changing this uh, perspective of society towards temple will take a lot of time, lot of energy, and lot of people to come on a same platform and start spreading awareness about these things. So this is difficult.
Ma'am, even today we have temple geography, which has an amalgamation of rivers, hills, even oceans and forests. So it's a very sacred geography, apart from being a socio-administrative area. So it's a very sacred geography, and they have been existing for the last hundreds and centuries together,
Yes.
right? But it's the human perspective which has changed. So how do you think, in the current minds, from the modern perspective, what are the initiatives that we need to take, or the government needs to take, or the society needs to take, so that in the younger generation we imbibe in them the same perspective which we had in our ancestors?
These natural elements that we are talking about, they were always integral part of developing architecture, and that's how eventually it becomes sacred architecture or sacred geography of any place. So the temples, like, when the temple is constructed, all these elements are taken into consideration as part of the larger ecosystem of temple. So we have water as an important element of a temple, or having vanams or forests in within the temple premises, having trees, significant trees within temple premises, has always been part of our culture. And the way Indian culture looks at this aspect of ecology is a long lasting, or making a longer impact on society or this ecosystem. For example, every temple has a sthala vruksham. So these sthala vrukshams are like, the trees which are locally grown, which impact the microclimate of a temple. So that's why when we enter a temple, there is a different experience. Microclimate changes as you enter the temple. Eventually, uh, again, the disconnect which I'm looking at right now is, the modern way of looking at sustainability is a short term view. We have certain measures to take, and then it becomes sustainable, which is again a short lived kind of a concept. But when we look at the ancient Indian wisdom about sustainability, it has a larger impact on society, on microclimate, on micro level issues of certain settlement. And that's how we think we see all these elements that you have mentioned were integral part of temple architecture, starting from the earliest times, starting from the site selection, starting from how this temple material was acquired, how construction technology was implemented on site. So all of that was extremely local, extremely defined by certain principles, so that nature is not disturbed anywhere, or to certain extent it is imbibed in the culture of temples, in many ways.
Dr. Chola, it has been really nice talking to you today on temple architecture, its conservation, how it was linked with economy, socio-administrative, political, trade, etc., etc. And at the end, how temple still stands as a important aspect of sacred geography, and it connects, interconnects, and also transcends our life with our previous ancestors, our heritage, our culture, etc. So it's been really nice discussing with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.